Sometimes love isn't what it seems. And sometimes affection becomes the most dangerous mask of all. In the quiet town of Maple Glen, what began as a second chance at happiness ended in terror, leaving a community asking, how could no one have seen the signs? This is the chilling case of Annalise Parker, her mother Diana, and the stepfather who slowly, methodically destroyed their lives from the inside out. What you're about to hear is not fiction. These are real people, real events, and a real reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Stay with us until the end, because nothing in this story is what it seems. And the twist? You won't see it coming. It all began in the summer of 2016. The town of Maple Glen, nestled in the wooded heart of Virginia, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. A place where families grew old together, where strangers waved at each other on the street, and where tragedy seemed like something that only happened on TV. But no one, not even the most seasoned detective, could have imagined the horror that was quietly brewing behind the white shutters of 312 Briarwood Lane. That summer, Diana Parker, a single mother of one, was finally beginning to feel like herself again. After a painful divorce from her high school sweetheart, she had spent nearly 3 years raising her daughter, Annalise, alone. It wasn't easy. Diana worked double shifts at the local diner, picked up cleaning jobs on weekends, and somehow still managed to attend every school recital, bake sale, and birthday party. Annalise was her world, bright, artistic, and only 11 years old. And then came Elliot Rourke. He walked into Diana's life like a storm dressed in sunshine. Tall, charming, always with the right thing to say. He had a softness in his eyes that made people trust him, and a way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the room. He was different, or so Diana believed. They met at the grocery store. He offered to help her reach something on the top shelf. They exchanged numbers. By the end of that same month, they were having dinner every other night. To Diana, Elliot was a miracle. A man who didn't care about her past, who made her laugh again, who seemed to genuinely adore her daughter. Annalise was cautious at first. Quiet, polite, but distant. Elliot didn't push. He brought her sketchbooks, complimented her drawings, and asked about her favorite books. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he eased into their lives like a shadow at sunset. 6 months later, they were married. That was the beginning of the end. To outsiders, they were a picture-perfect family. Elliot, the doting stepfather, always ready with a smile and a helping hand. Diana, finally glowing with happiness again. And Annalise, well, she smiled for photos. She said please and thank you. She never complained. But there was something off. Small things. Things people ignored. Like how Annalise's sketches became darker. Faces with no eyes, shadowy figures standing in corners. Captions like, "He watches," scribbled in the margins. Or how she stopped inviting friends over. How she flinched when Elliot touched her shoulder. How her once sparkling laughter had grown quieter, shorter, more forced. And then there were the locked doors. Diana said it was just to keep Annalise out of Elliot's home office. "He's writing a novel," she explained. "He needs space." What Diana didn't know, what no one knew, was that Elliot had no novel. He had secrets. Late at night, after Diana fell asleep, Elliot would sometimes sneak into Annalise's room. Not to harm her, at least not in ways that left bruises, but to whisper things. Strange things. Confusing things. "You're special," he'd say. "No one understands you like I do. You're the only one I can really talk to." He called it their bond. And Annalise, too young to fully understand, grew increasingly withdrawn. But she didn't say anything. Because Elliot said if she told, her mother would leave him. And if that happened, everything would fall apart. And Diana? She was in love. She was finally happy. And when Elliot told her Annalise was acting out, she believed him. "She's just having a hard time adjusting," he said one night. "Puberty," he added with a shrug. "She needs structure." So Diana agreed when Elliot suggested homeschooling. "Just until she gets better," he said. And just like that, Annalise disappeared from public view. No more teachers. No more friends. No more eyes on her. By the time someone realized what was happening, it was far too late. It was a chilly October morning when the first real crack in Elliot's carefully constructed world began to show. Diana had just returned from a night shift. Her hands were raw from washing dishes, and her eyes begged for sleep. But when she stepped into the house, something felt off. Too quiet. No cartoons playing in the background. No smell of breakfast. And most telling of all, no Annalise. She checked the bedroom. The bed was made. Neatly. Too neatly for an 11-year-old girl. Her backpack was gone. So were some of her clothes. Panicked, Diana called out. No answer. And then Elliot came downstairs, groggy and yawning, claiming that Annalise had gone for a walk. She said she wanted to clear her head, he muttered, sipping coffee. She's probably just at the park. But Diana knew her daughter. Annalise never left the house without telling her. And she hated the cold. Narrator, tension rising. Hours passed. No sign of Annalise. Diana called her friends, checked every corner of the neighborhood. Still nothing. When she finally contacted the police, Elliot protested. She's not missing, Diana. You're overreacting. But the mother's instinct, stronger than love, stronger than fear, kicked in. And Diana insisted. A missing persons report was filed. What followed next was a blur of search parties, flashing lights, and sympathetic detectives. Neighbors put up flyers. Volunteers combed the woods. Helicopters buzzed overhead. But not a single trace of Annalise could be found. And Elliot? He played the part of the heartbroken stepfather well. Too well. He cried on camera, begged for her safe return, and held Diana's hand with the tenderness of a man who had everything to lose. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. The detectives noticed. His story changed just slightly every time he told it. First, Annalise had gone for a walk. Then she was meeting a friend. Then she had left after an argument. There was no friend. No argument. No walk. Detective Maria Henley, a seasoned officer with the Maple Glen Police Department, began digging. And what she found disturbed her. Elliot had no writing credits to his name, no publisher, no manuscript. He hadn't worked in over a year. His last known employer had fired him for inappropriate conduct. But those details had never made it into Diana's fairy tale. Even more troubling were the locked drawers in his so-called home office. Police obtained a warrant. Inside, they found dozens of Annalise's drawings, each one more disturbing than the last. Dark eyes in doorways, blood-red scribbles, words like, "I can't breathe," and "He watches while I sleep" scrawled across the paper. They also found something else. A journal. It belonged to Elliot. The entries began innocently enough. Reflections about love, his desire to start over, his admiration for Diana. But slowly they turned obsessive. He wrote about Annalise, about how she was different, how she understood him, how their connection was deeper than anything he'd felt before. One entry read, "She's the only one who sees me. Diana is too blind. But Annalise knows the truth. We were meant to be together, one way or another." That journal changed everything. Elliot was arrested that same day. But there was still no sign of Annalise. The trial was sensational. The small town of Maple Glen became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Families locked their doors for the first time in years. And Diana, heartbroken, betrayed, took the stand. She testified to everything she knew. The way Elliot isolated her daughter. The strange things he said. The late-night visits. The homeschooling. The lies. Her pain was palpable. But there was one question no one could answer. For 2 years, that question haunted Maple Glen. Elliot refused to talk. Diana spiraled. She moved away. Tried to start over. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's face. And heard that last conversation. "Mom, please don't marry him. Something's not right." She hadn't listened. She would never forgive herself. 2 years. That's how long Annalise remained missing. 2 birthdays passed with candles unlit. 2 Christmas mornings with one less stocking by the fire. The house Diana once called a home was now just a graveyard of memories, each one stained with regret. But sometimes, the truth doesn't stay buried. And in the summer of 2023, 2 years after the disappearance, something surfaced. Literally. A construction crew had been clearing an old drainage area just 5 miles outside of Maple Glen. The land had been untouched for years, once owned by a publishing company that folded in the 90s, now earmarked for redevelopment. As machines clawed through the overgrown brush and crumbling earth, one worker spotted something strange tangled in the roots of a tree. A faded backpack. Pink. With patches Annalise's mother had sewn on by hand. Inside were several waterlogged notebooks and a bracelet. It was Annalise's, her name engraved on a tiny silver plate. The site was immediately shut down. Forensic teams moved in, and soon a shallow grave was discovered. The remains inside were confirmed through dental records. It was Annalise. The autopsy was heartbreaking. No signs of blunt force trauma, no stabbing, no obvious external injuries. But the medical examiner made one chilling conclusion. Annalise had been buried alive. Dirt was found in her lungs. She had fought to breathe, fought to scream, but she had died in silence. The revelation shattered Diana. She had hoped, prayed, that somehow her daughter had run away, that she was living under a different name, maybe with a kind stranger, maybe just waiting to be found. But this was a nightmare made flesh. The journal they found in Elliot's desk was reintroduced into evidence, along with forensic findings from the burial site, including DNA traces from Elliot under Annalise's fingernails. He had tried to silence her one last time, and failed. In court, Elliot remained eerily calm. No outbursts, no tears, just silence. His lawyers tried to plead mental instability. They painted him as a man broken by childhood trauma and creative delusions. But the jury didn't buy it. They saw the truth for what it was. A grown man who manipulated a family, groomed a child, and when she refused to play his twisted game, ended her life in the most horrifying way imaginable. Elliot was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But for Diana, there was no sense of justice. No prison cell could undo what had been done. She often said, "I was supposed to protect her, and I didn't. That guilt will never leave me." But this story doesn't end in the courtroom. It doesn't end with Elliot behind bars. Because what came next was unexpected. Diana didn't disappear. She didn't sink into despair. She fought back. She started a foundation in Annalise's name, the Annalise Hope Project. Its mission, to raise awareness about grooming, coercive control, and the red flags too many single parents miss. Diana began speaking at schools, hosting seminars, supporting other families who were targeted by predators hiding behind charm and fake smiles. She turned her pain into power, and in doing so, she honored Annalise's memory in the most meaningful way possible. Love, when twisted by obsession, becomes something dangerous. But love, when used to heal, can rebuild even the most shattered lives. Diana may never stop grieving, but she refuses to let her daughter's story be defined by tragedy alone. Annalise laughed. She painted. She danced in the living room. She wrote poems about starlight and superheroes. And now, her light helps others see what they once couldn't. Grief is like an ocean. Some days, it's calm, manageable. Other days, it drowns you. For Diana, navigating the aftermath of Annalise's death was like walking through fire, barefoot, every day. But the fire didn't consume her. It shaped her. Where others would have broken, Diana chose to build. Not for herself, but for every parent who still had time to listen. Every child who still had a voice. The Annalise Hope Project didn't just raise awareness. It saved lives. Within 6 months, it had partnered with 3 local schools to develop programs that helped children recognize emotional manipulation and inappropriate boundaries, even when it came from someone trusted. The initiative trained counselors to detect signs of grooming earlier. It funded emergency response protocols. And most importantly, It gave students a safe, anonymous way to report concerns. But Diana wasn't just working behind the scenes. She became a speaker, a fierce, honest voice in rooms full of uncomfortable silence. She told Annalise's story, not with theatrics, not to shock, but to wake people up. And people listened, because Diana didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like a mother who refused to let another parent bury their child because they missed the signs she had once ignored. She told them about the subtle red flags, like how Elliot always positioned himself as the only one who truly understood Annalise, how he gradually created emotional distance between mother and daughter, how he always insisted on being the one to take her to school or pick her up, and how, in the name of love, he crossed every boundary. Parents wept, teachers wrote down notes, and survivors found their courage. They came up to Diana after talks, whispered their truths for the first time in years. Some were now adults, some were still kids, but each story added fuel to Diana's mission. It wasn't just a redemption arc, it was a revolution, one born from heartbreak. And though Diana could never undo the past, she had finally found a way to live with it. Not by forgetting her daughter, but by making sure the world remembered her too. There was one final thing Diana did. A quiet thing. A personal thing. She returned to the place where Annalise had been found. The tree where the backpack had caught. She planted wildflowers around it, Anne's favorite. And each year, on the anniversary of her death, she sits there in silence. Not to relive the horror, but to remember the beauty. The girl who wore sunflower barrettes and sang to her cat when she thought no one was listening. And though Diana no longer believes in fairy tales, she believes in the power of love. The kind that protects, the kind that heals, the kind that tells the truth, even when it hurts. We like to think that predators wear masks, that they sneak into our lives in the dead of night or lurk in alleyways. But the truth? More often than not, they walk right through the front door. They're charming, helpful, sometimes even too helpful, and they often come bearing love. Elliot wasn't the monster from under the bed. He was the man who made pancakes on Sundays, the one who paid the bills, rubbed Diana's shoulders when she was tired, and listened attentively to Annalise's stories about her favorite fantasy books. To the outside world, he was a model partner, a father figure, a man who had stepped up when Annalise's biological father had stepped out. But predators don't always pounce. Sometimes they groom. Grooming isn't always physical. In fact, the most dangerous kind is psychological. It starts with emotional dependency, isolation, overstepping privacy under the guise of concern, comments masked as compliments. It escalates slowly, so slowly, in fact, that the victim often doesn't realize what's happening until the boundary is completely gone and the shame has taken root. Elliot knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't just want Annalise's attention. He wanted control. And when he saw her pulling away, reclaiming that control, he panicked. That's why her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a choice. One made by a man who had been carefully crafting his mask for years. There were signs. Always. Subtle ones. But we miss them. Not because we don't care, but because we're not taught to look for them. We teach stranger danger. We forget that most danger comes from people who know our routines, our soft spots, and how to weaponize trust. So what can we learn? From Diana's heartbreak, from Annalise's silence, from Elliot's manipulation? We learn that vigilance doesn't mean paranoia. It means education. It means paying attention when a child suddenly changes. It means trusting your instincts when something feels off. It means checking in, even when everything seems fine. Especially when everything seems fine. This story isn't just a warning, it's a wake-up call. It's not about blaming mothers like Diana. It's about giving them the tools to ask better questions, to listen more carefully, to believe their gut, and most importantly, to believe their children. Because predators don't thrive in darkness. They thrive in doubt. For every Annalise, there are thousands more children who will never tell their story because they were never given the space to. Or worse, because no one ever asked. We owe it to them to be better. To see what's often hidden in plain sight. To know that love, when warped by obsession and control, can turn deadly. And to understand, that silence is the most dangerous accomplice of all. When tragedy strikes, we often look for someone to blame, someone to hold accountable. But justice doesn't always come in the way we expect. Sometimes it's swift, other times painfully delayed, and occasionally it's denied entirely. After Annalise's death, the town fell into silence. Not the respectful kind, no. The kind that's laced with whispers behind closed doors. The kind that avoids eye contact in the grocery store aisles. The kind that asks how something like this could happen but doesn't really want to know the answer. Diana was questioned extensively. People wanted to know how she didn't see it, how she let Elliot into her home, into her daughter's life, into her trust. But that question, painful as it was, became Diana's fuel. Because even through her guilt, even through the wreckage of her soul, she wanted to know the answer. 2. The trial was grueling. The prosecution leaned heavily on the journal, on Annalise's withdrawn behavior in school, on the sudden shift in her mental health during the last year of her life. The defense tried to paint a different picture, one of a troubled teenager. But the truth couldn't be buried anymore. Elliot was convicted of second-degree murder and multiple counts of child endangerment. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. But no sentence could bring Annalise back. Justice, in its rawest form, means someone is held accountable. But it doesn't mean the healing is over. It doesn't sew the torn edges of a mother's heart. It doesn't erase the guilt of missed signs or undo the what-ifs that play on loop night after night. Diana stopped celebrating holidays. She moved away from that small town. And for months, she didn't speak a word to anyone outside of grief counselors and lawyers. But time, though not a healer, is a companion to pain. And eventually, Diana began to write. She wrote letters to Annalise, to herself, to other mothers she would never meet. She started a small online support group for parents who had lost children in preventable tragedies. And slowly, with trembling hands, she began to rebuild her world. Not the same world as before, but one made from truth and survival. Because survival is its own form of justice. We often hear that time heals all wounds. But the truth is, some wounds never fully close. They just stop bleeding. Annalise's story isn't just about one man's darkness. It's about the cracks in the system, the silence we excuse in the name of politeness, the blind spots we ignore to preserve a happy facade. But more than anything, it's about the power of a voice, even after death. Her journal became a lifeline, a last act of courage, a whisper that screamed truth when her actual voice had been silenced for too long. In the end, Annalise wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter. And because of her, other girls like her might be seen, might be heard, might be believed. Some stories end with justice. Others end with heartbreak. And a rare few end with both. But what comes after the final gavel slams, after the media coverage fades, after the condolences stop arriving, is a long, silent stretch of something no one ever prepares you for. Grief. For Diana, the world became unrecognizable. There were no school drop-offs, no late-night homework sessions, no whispered I love yous from a sleepy teenager. The house was too quiet, the rooms too clean, the silence too loud. But within that silence, something unexpected began to bloom. A fire, not a fire of rage, though she had every reason to burn with it. This was something quieter, stronger. A fire for change. Diana became a voice, not just for Annalise, but for every child whose pain had been dismissed. She worked with local advocacy groups, sharing Annalise's story in school programs and parent forums. At first, it was hard, telling and retelling the story that broke her. But with each retelling, another parent learned how to look closer, how to ask the questions, how to listen when silence itself was a cry for help. Diana pushed for legislation requiring schools to provide mental health screening in suspected cases of emotional neglect. She created scholarships in Annalise's name for young girls pursuing journalism, because Annalise once said she wanted to be a reporter, to uncover secrets that needed the light. Even in death, her voice continued its work, But not everyone understood. Some people accused Diana of turning her daughter's tragedy into a cause. Others whispered that maybe she was trying to atone for what she didn't see. And maybe she was. But what they didn't understand was this. When the worst thing imaginable happens, you only have two choices: to drown in it, or to build something from the wreckage. So Diana chose to build. And what about Elliot? He never spoke again after his sentencing. No apologies, no letters, no remorse, just silence, cold, calculated, impenetrable. Some believed he was mentally ill. Others believed he was simply evil. But one truth remained. He stole something precious. And not even a life sentence could restore what he took years past. The house where it all happened was eventually sold. The neighborhood moved on, like neighborhoods always do. A new family moved in, unaware of the pain that lingered in its walls. But Diana never forgot. And neither did the people who loved Annalise on what would have been her 21st birthday. Dozens gathered in a local park, lighting lanterns in her memory. Each one rising into the night sky. A glowing reminder that even after death, light can rise. Even from the darkest places. What do we take from stories like this? Pain?
Yes. Shock?
Absolutely. But also awareness. Because somewhere out there, another child is writing in a journal, afraid to speak. And somewhere, a parent is wondering if they're overreacting. Let this story remind you that it's never too soon to ask, to listen, to see. That monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they sit at the dinner table and smile. And that love, when twisted by control and obsession, can become something truly deadly. But love, real love, heals too. It creates support groups. It writes laws. It builds legacies. Annalise may be gone, but her story lives on, not just as a warning, but as a beacon. And Diana? She's not just a mother who lost her child. She's a woman who turned heartbreak into hope. A woman who reminded the world that even broken hearts can still fight for something beautiful. If this story moved you, share it. Let it be a reminder. Let it be a warning. Let it be a light. Subscribe for more true stories that matter. And remember, sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply listen.